Kristen Bomas. This is an open forum, so if you have any questions, any thoughts, anything you want me to elaborate on, feel free. You have in front of you just a list of some of the things I'm going to quickly go over. I don't want to get too clinical today because the clinical, and I'm going to talk about it in a minute, is really not why you're here. You want to know how to get from this place of depression, anxiety into a place of happiness. And so we're going to look at what are some of those shifts that we can do. So I do want you to feel free to interrupt at any point in time. So I'm going to stand. I'll stand for a little bit since we've got some people in the back as well. So depression and anxiety are really flip sides of the same coin. They both work off of your serotonin levels. The depression, you kind of go into a lull. The anxiety, you go into a little bit of a high. So anybody who has anxiety knows that after a day of intense anxiety, the following day you're exhausted and you're feeling somewhat depressed. Or after a bout of depression, you can feel a little bit more anxiety. So that's because they're really flip sides of the same coin. They both not only use the same neurotransmitter for the most part, which is why if we don't use a benzodiazepine to treat anxiety, we use an antidepressant, what we call an SSRI category, which is directly affecting the serotonin. And we use those antidepressants because they then affect the anxiety as well, and they're non-addictive. Your body can become somewhat dependent on them, but they're not addictive. So the thoughts connect with the serotonin, and the serotonin connects with the thoughts. So your neurotransmitter, serotonin, is what regulates the mood. So your thoughts then can hold it in place. When I'm working with someone, what's really important, especially in depression, is how far along are their thoughts. If, in fact, they're at a place where their thoughts are starting to be so heavy and dark, they can't get out of the heavier thinking, I get a little concerned. Okay, so now if I can get them to get their thoughts more, positive in the course of a day, even a little bit here and a little bit there, then we know that the thoughts can then alter the serotonin and we can break the cycle. And now I can teach them how to break the cycle through their thoughts. If the thoughts have fallen completely into the darkness, that's when it becomes more important to use either a medication or a supplement. I do my best to start with supplements rather than medications, but acute care, Western medicine does great with acute care. So we put them on the antidepressant on my practice. They're on that for about 3 months, no more than 6, and then they're weaned right back off to see if we can get their natural body back into gear, putting everything back into place. So we're looking constantly at that cycle between the thought processes and the chemical processes in your body and how one addresses the other and then comes right back around to address the original. So again, flip sides of the same coin. The old drug of choice for anxiety were the benzodiazepines, the Xanax, the Valium, the Ativan, whatever. And Ativan is even still used today for sleep with a lot of people who are struggling with depression and or anxiety. I'm not a fan of that. I've been doing substance abuse work and addiction work for over 30 years, and the benzodiazepines are a royal pain to get somebody off of it because your body becomes so chemically dependent upon them, and it really can lead very easily to an addiction as well. So I do my best to work with anything natural, and if we do have to go to a medication, to go with something that's not going to also be chemically addictive, like an SSRI or something that's more of an antidepressant. So that's kind of where you see the parallels back and forth. And as we go forward, we're going to talk a little bit more about those. So in front of you, I gave you 2 pages of handouts. One, I'm going to run through the list of symptoms on anxiety and depression, and they're going to seem a little bit different. And on the second one, we're not going to address this until much later in the talk, but that's things that can be done. So let's look at the symptoms of anxiety. So anxiety is going to, this is where if you want to interrupt, if you want to ask any questions, please feel free. I'd be happy to answer anything, any thoughts, anything at all. Anxiety, excessive worry. Anxiety is really kind of defined as the fear of the fear, right? So it's not like I'm directly afraid of falling. It's that I'm afraid of the fear of falling. And so because I've never fallen in my life from a high place, it's not like I'm afraid of the fall, because I'm not falling. I'm afraid of the fear of the falling, or whatever the fear may be. And the person usually finds it's very difficult to control their worry, so you know, their worry warts, but they think that their worry is important to their day-to-day activity. You know, what would I do without my worry? I wouldn't produce as much as I'm producing right now. That's what motivates me, blah, blah, blah. Not really, that's actually a part of the component of anxiety. Your true motivation in that is to get away from the worry, to get away from the fear. So you're motivated to be free of what I call a fear-based emotion or set of emotions, and anxiety, of course, is laden with them. Restlessness, a feeling of being, you know, kind of keyed up or on edge or something like that. Those are all signs and symptoms of an anxiety. It can be brief, it can be not. Easily fatigued, and you'll hear this from people who are very high stressed. Stress and anxiety are very different, right? But stress can trip the switch on anxiety. So what happens is the energy that is lost through this anxiety just wipes out the body. So they're exhausted, and they can't, no matter how much they sleep, they can't seem to feel revitalized and brought back. So the anxiety really beats them up that way. Stress is something that is anchored in expectations and is situationally, it's like you've given me a deadline and I'm stressing over meeting that deadline. So it is directly related to that piece. So that stress can trip the switch of my anxiety. If my anxiety is I'm not good enough to meet the deadline, oh my God, what if I don't meet the deadline? Oh my God, what's going to happen if I don't meet the deadline? Now I've moved from the stress into the anxiety. The difference with the exhaustion and stress is you recover from it. If you're dealing with an ongoing anxiety, you don't feel the recovery of the fatigue. That's the difference. That was a great question. Thank you very much. Does that help everybody understand? Okay. So where am I here? The difficulty concentrating or your mind going blank, I will tell you, I am absolutely the worst with names. And one time I was at a business meeting with my best friend, and there were 8 people standing in a circle, and I knew all 8 of them. But I had, you've heard this, right? But I was like, oh my God, I'm going to forget one of their names. I just know I'm going to forget one of their names. And I wanted her to meet all of them. And so I go through all 8. This is so-and-so and what he does and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I get all the way around to Suzanne, and I looked at her and I went, yeah, I can't remember your name. And we just started to laugh hysterically because I just went completely blank. And it came from my being anxious over remembering everybody's name, and of course forgetting the one person who's closest to me. Right here. Okay, irritable. The irritability, that's almost obvious. I don't even know that I need to say anything, but that irritability that comes with anxious is because you're constantly feeling like your skin is crawling and you're constantly like tight and tense, and that just leads to that feeling of irritability. And again, that's the next set of symptoms: the tense, the muscle tightness. Just feeling, at times it can be so intense for so long for some people with anxiety that they experience muscle cramping. That's not so unusual because you're depleting the body of all kinds of nutrients from the level of anxiety and stress that you're dealing with. And of course then the final symptom, as I have them listed, is sleep disturbance. People just don't sleep. They wake up in the middle of the night. Their mind is racing. Their mind is racing before they go to sleep. Some people will wake up in the morning with a startle, and they're like already feeling the anxiety before they even put their feet on the ground. So each of those types of mind racing symptoms with anxiety can have a different history to it. It may come from a different place. It may be something a little bit different, but it is absolutely still working with the anxiety, whether it's coming from a traumatic issue or not, to interrupt the sleep process, thereby making the person more tired. And the more tired we are, the more we have difficulty concentrating, the more our defenses start to falter. And the more our defenses start to falter, the more the anxiety can kick in and take hold of our thoughts and take us on that wild toad ride. Right? Certainly when you're experiencing anxiety, you are absolutely going to have physical experiences with it, and same with depression. The cause can, the cause can absolutely be physical, especially if it was a traumatic cause. So absolutely, if you've got a physical, this is the way anxiety works, and I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I think it's a good time to talk about it. When you look at anxiety happening, let's say you're out fishing, and all of a sudden you have an anxiety attack. And you're like, man, this is where I'm relaxing. Why am I having an anxiety attack? And you just don't know why you're having an anxiety attack. So our first thought process is to look around us at the immediate. You know, what caused my anxiety attack, right? Well, nothing. In the immediate, I'm sitting here, I'm fishing, I can't figure it out. Why can't I figure it out? It doesn't make any sense. Why am I having this anxiety attack? Anxiety works with symbols. So when I'm working with somebody who has anxiety, the very first thing I want to do is I want to dismantle the symbols around them and what is the original cause of the anxiety? So I have one client, and the original cause of anxiety was not being able to get back. Okay, now, literally, he had, as a child, he got lost and was unable to get back. That's a physical experience, it's also an emotional experience, and he couldn't get back. So the switch got tripped in his early adult years when, out partying with everybody, they go on a sleigh ride, and all of a sudden he's like, what if we can't get back? Having no idea that thought even hit, he went into a full panic. And then thoughts take over, and the panic was always anytime he was leaving, traveling, going away. What if I can't get back? So it was a physical incident that was fearful that then came back years later to be the cause of an anxiety. Does that make sense? And however, the physical incident of crossing over and returning back to body it scared you. So the feeling of the fear is very real. It's like, holy cow, because you weren't prepared to die at that time. You were at the peak of your performance, and all of a sudden, poof, gone, and then back again, and now everything has changed. So you've got layers of pieces that you can actually go into there. You can look at not only the physical act of crossing over and coming back, and I do know several people who have done that, whether it's literally crossing over and coming back or going into a coma for a period of months and traveling while they're crossed over, because they travel when they go into a coma. And the anxiety, some of them come back with anxiety, some of them do not. Depends upon what their experience on the other side was sometimes. But yes, that is a physical experience that you went through that tripped the switch of fear in you. Not invincible anymore. Now, all of a sudden, it's not fear of fear, but all of a sudden death is knocking, and you came back. Now you don't know. There's a vagueness there now. You don't quite know if everything is as you were predicting it before. Now I'm making guesses. But those are the kinds of things we would want to look at. What did that experience, what kind of a switch did that trip inside when you got back and conscious of your environment and the fact that you just had that experience, and how did that settle in? It can have some traumatic underpinnings for sure. For God's sake, I mean, how could it not, right? And trauma is a little bit different. We're going to talk about that next Monday, but you'll see how trauma actually has as a symptom anxiety, and it can also have as a symptom depression, because it is, your life is threatened, and in your life it was very much threatened and then gifted back. In anxiety, it's the shutting down synaptically. In this case, it's like it's not important any longer. So if it's not that important, then your brain just lets it go and focuses on whatever is important to you at that time. So those are two very different mental processes. One is kind of a forced, and one is anchored more in a choice, so to speak. That, some things are important to us and some are not. I am not anchored to the physical storyline in this life. So there are things that I just don't choose to remember because they just are not that important to me. I remember some of the other stuff that's happening in the storyline, the impact on the human being. I can remember details in my clients' lives all the way back. But I may not remember the specific storyline. I remember how it had an effect on them, because that's what's important to me, not necessarily the storyline. So you're going through something similar. When you die and come back, you realize remembering 10,000 names is probably not the most important thing in the world, right? It can be anxiety. Mm-hmm. If you know you have some other anxiety, that's a perfect example of where stress influences it. So the stress is, oh my God, I've got to do something I don't want to do. So it's not congruent. Inside, you don't want to do it, but you feel like you should. You're expecting. Yeah. That's an external expectation going against what your desire is internally. And that lack of congruence can really put you in a place of stress, and that stress can also exhaust you. Now, if you have some anxiety around some other stuff, then yes, that's where your stress is going to trip the anxiety. Okay. The consistency, the level of worry. So when you're stressed, it's more what's the word? I just lost my word. Situationally symptomatic. So, your example was perfect. There's something you have to do that you don't want to do, and you're feeling the impact, and you just kind of want to, avoid or do whatever. That we all feel anxiety. The thing about anxiety and depression is that every single one of us has felt anxiety before and has felt depressed before. Those are just part of our set of emotions in this lifetime, period. Everybody knows them. Mm-hmm. So when they start to become more consistently present, so if in fact the worry is all day long, not all day long, but let's say it's daily, and you start to notice that the worry is over things that are they're over things that are in the future, or worry about things that don't really exist yet, you know, then you want to start to ask yourself what might be happening with some anxiety. It can be mild, but now you're looking at worry being a little bit more symptomatic of the anxiety. So there's a consistency, there's a worry. If you're feeling tired, if you're feeling a lot of frustration over not being able to correct those worries because they're so consistent, those can be signs that maybe there's an anxiety component that you can work with. And again, you know, that anxiety component, once we understand what it is, and I will talk about this a little bit later, but awareness is critical. Once you understand and you're aware of what it is you're dealing with, now you can, you know, take the steps necessary for the healing. So yes. Perfect. So does that help answer that question? Okay. Any others? Okay. So let's go through then the list of symptoms for depression. And you're going to see, even though they sound a little bit different, that's just not so much. Again, you're feeling sad or depressed or lonely in some way, but on a regular basis. And so most days or most of a day for, you know, intermittently, marked decrease in interest. I mean, it's just like it's got to be a marked diminishment. What's the word I'm looking for? Where your interest in, you were an athlete. Let's imagine that you didn't have the crossing over experience, and you know every day you go out and you play, you know, tennis or golf or football or whatever, and one day you just find yourself like not interested in going out and playing, you know. Or maybe every day you enjoy walking, and all of a sudden you just don't feel like walking, or you just don't feel like cooking, and you love to cook, or something. You just start to feel that lack of interest, right? Mm-hmm. That is a sign. You don't look forward to those things that are pleasurable to you any longer. It's not foremost in your mind. The other thing that's very, very significant with depression, especially when it becomes severe, is weight gain or loss. And we're looking at a change of 5% of body weight within a month. Now, we can also see weight loss with anxiety because people, if their anxiety spikes, they tend to lose their appetite and they tend to not eat as much. But with depression, if it's more significant in somebody, we do see either a decrease or an increase in weight in a relatively short amount of time. Again, the sleep disorders, they can be insomniac or hypersomniac. And so they're either sleeping all the time or not sleeping at all. And again, the more we don't sleep, the more the depression can kick in because, again, our defenses fall and our cognitions pick up and take us for a ride. Well, there are a couple things that you can do, and when we get to talking about some things, but for sure, the sleep hygiene is really critical. I call it sleep hygiene because it's really looking at how you set that stage, right? How you deal with the times where you're hyper and the times that you're in. Like, okay, so like, what am I doing? And then that's kind of a swing also. You may also be having times where when you're sleeping a lot, dream time is having an effect on you, and that dream time then kicks you into a gear where you don't want to sleep anymore, and you're not aware of that little switch being tripped. So there can be a lot of hidden pieces going on as well. But certainly, if I was going to say where I'd start for someone like you is I would start with sleep hygiene, and I will get to that a little bit later. And if I don't, you make sure that I do, because I think that that's always critical to all of us, and whether it's because we're just getting older and our sleep is all goofy now, or it's because we have anxiety or depression or something else that's interfering with our sleep, right? That hormones interfere with our sleep. It's just the craziest thing in the world. So we can, you know, what are some of the things that we can do to start to assess, you know, what's physical and what's we can change with our own habits. Let's put glasses on, that's why we have them. Psychomotor agitation or retardation. So again, it's all of a sudden they're just walking slow, or they start to talk slower, or it's more hyper, but they're agitated, and so they're kind of, you know, and again, this is where you see the crossover with anxiety, because it sometimes you're going to think it's more anxiety, but if it's sitting within a set of symptoms that are much more depression, we have to be able to make that distinction. Sometimes we can, well, not me, but sometimes as friends and family of those, you can, and sometimes you can't. And that's when you would call a professional just for some support. They have, depression comes with a set of feelings of worthlessness, of some excess or inappropriate guilt. This isn't always, obviously. Some of these are going to be present, some not. But that guilt is, it's almost like it doesn't even make sense. Like, oh, you know, I feel so bad for this. Like, and you're looking at the person going like, bad, like this, you're okay, nothing happened here. That can be a sign of depression. It's either excessive guilt or it just doesn't match the situation in some way. And that goes back to their worthlessness. Because they feel worthless, that guilt can slip back in, because guilt is feeling like you've done something bad because you're not good enough or whatever. And we can go more into that if anybody needs me to. There is a diminished ability to think or to concentrate. Again, you can see how this parallels with anxiety. It's very hard to focus. Their mind wanders. It goes right back into like a slumber mindset. Some of them get agitated, but the ability to focus and concentrate isn't there. They don't want to make a decision if they used to. They can't make a decision. They can't seem to know where they want to go, left, right, up, or down. And then, of course, the most common that everybody is aware of are the recurring thoughts of death, suicide, suicidal ideation. And of course, we hope they don't get to a place where their suicidal thoughts are coupled with a plan that's actually able to be activated. That's when it becomes particularly dangerous. So your symptoms, and I went ahead and gave them to you on a piece of paper so that you can kind of, and anytime you want to ask me, like I'm so easily accessible, you can, reach me by email, you can reach me by phone, but don't hesitate to reach out to anybody. It doesn't matter who. If you're seeing a set of symptoms in yourself or someone you love or care about, reach out and ask how they are all fitting together. So I'm going to end with some of the things that you can do, just basic behaviors and things you can do for anxiety or depression. But I'd like to first talk, about what I'm passionate about, which is if you're struggling with some anxiety or depression in some way, how do you get from there back to your place of peak performance? And maybe we all age, so maybe your performance won't be the same, but how does your identity go back to where it was? How do we find happiness within our lives, even though we're currently experiencing things that kind of steal that away on the temporary, or for some people, a little bit more permanent basis? The very first thing I want to say to all of you is, no matter what it is you're experiencing with anxiety or depression or anything else that is upsetting you, it is a challenge in this life. And I want you to think this is only a challenge. It's not defining you. It's not defining your entire life. It is a challenge. And what I mean by a challenge is anything that puts you on the uncomfortable side of life. It's what I call the fear-based side, because the fear-based side is the uncomfortable side. The love-based side is the joyous side. So if we take it and we make it very, very simple, which I do when I teach, I make it very, very simple so that everybody feels much more in control. And then we also take the vagueness out this way. There's no vagueness when we make it simple, right? So it's a challenge. It's something that's making your life uncomfortable. It's something that you know isn't who you are and what you are. It's not a match, because if it was a match, you'd be feeling happy and joyous. Mm-hmm. So we know that whatever is going on there is something that is counter to your joy. So it's just a challenge, okay? Don't make it anything more than that. Understand that first and foremost. Secondly, you don't want to identify with it. Like we tend to identify with it, especially when it has changed our life as much as like we start to identify with this new way of existing, and it may be anxious, it may be depressed, it may be a combination or somewhere on the in-between, but we start to identify with it. I urge you not to identify with it and to keep saying, okay, this is an emotional experience, it is a state of mind, but it is going to move through me and I can help it along and I can get myself back on track. We're talking about anxiety and depression. And like I said a few minutes ago, every single person in this room and every single person out there has felt anxious or depressed at some time in this life. It is a set of our normal, everyday emotions. It's when it starts to become a little bit more problematic and consistent or persistent that we start to identify it as something more than just a passing feeling. So when that happens, let's imagine that the emotion is really the language of your spirit, your true self, right? That's a language inside, that emotion that you feel. And so when we start to really understand that anxiety and depression are fear-based emotions, then we start to go back inside and say, okay, where is this coming from and what is this about? Why is it in your life? It's there with some sort of a purpose to push you forward, not to destroy you. but to propel you forward. And that's important to really start to grasp. And I teach that constant, because as soon as you start to understand that this is not here to destroy, it's here to move you forward, then all of a sudden you're looking for different answers than you were the first time around, right? So there's a song, which I'm not going to play for you, but there's a line in it that says, sometimes in life you're in that darkness, and what you don't realize is you're just as far in the tunnel as you are out of the tunnel. And so everything seems dark, and if you keep turning around, right? If I keep turning around and doing the same thing over and over, I feel like there's never a light at the end of the tunnel, only because I don't keep putting one foot in front of another to find the out. So you have to remember, this is not something you have to identify with, and not something you have to just give into. This is something that you want to move through, you want to transcend, and you want to let it propel you forward on your journey. It's just part of your purpose on this plane. That it's here with some sort of purpose, and we must define what that is. So the truth of who you are, underneath all of this fear, is this soulful purpose of being here, right? And that purpose is to find joy and happiness and freedom, right? That's what we all are looking for in some way or another, is everybody's wanting to find that place. Well, that consistency tells us that there's something more going on inside us than just it's a thought. So why would we have these experiences that are not so fun? Right? So when you look at that, then you start to understand that your challenges in this life are to show you something. So imagine that imagine a chord on a keyboard, okay? And that chord has, we'll say, 8 notes. And it makes one sound. But if one of those notes is out of tune, you can identify that one note that's out of tune, right? So now imagine you're that one note, and you're out of tune. So now you can't feel yourself as blending in with the one, in unity and harmony with the whole. You feel isolated, you feel different. That's what this life is like. So we are out of tune in this life, and so the fear-based experiences are where we're out of tune. And as we get through those fear-based experiences, we end up on the other side. We go through the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's at that point that we start to still feel who we are. So you still know who you are as that note, but you've been tuned, and now you're back into the chord. And now that you're back into the chord, you can still identify yourself as the note that you are. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense, Sherman?
Nice analogy.
Yeah. So it's really getting to a point where you can really grasp the concept that the challenge is there with a purpose to move you forward in your existence and in this experience that we call life as a whole. So once you realize the purpose and the language of your challenge, now you're ready to kind of set the stage for the healing. And the healing is really what I believe in. I don't like to medicate away symptoms. I don't like people to live in suffering. If you're suffering over something that isn't making you happy, let's get rid of it. Let's transcend it. I don't care what it is. You're not going to scare me with any challenge you present, because I know that your body is here to heal each and every one of them. So we just need to identify what's going on and what we do need to heal. The most important step in the healing process, and I say this to everyone with whom I work, is the awareness. The more aware you can become of how this challenge is affecting you, where you feel it, where you don't feel it, where you think it comes from, where it maybe not comes from, like the more, just the awareness. Some people, it goes all the way back in life. Okay, well, let's be aware of that, because that awareness, then it's like the root in a tooth. We can then really identify how far down that infection goes and pull the whole thing out at once. So awareness is very, very, very important. And so I'm hoping that today, if you really just start to allow yourself to gain some awareness, you're going to be making a big step in the right direction. And then after you get the awareness going, you want to ask yourself a couple questions. What are the old beliefs that are tied into the way you're feeling about yourself right now? And I'm going to use you, Sherman, as an example. If I had a life and I felt invincible, and all of a sudden I die and I come back and I realize I'm not what I thought I was, I've got those old beliefs of being invincible that are still haunting me in some way. I don't know if they are. I'm just using it as an example. So I'm going to then identify with not having that invincibility and being not good enough, not what I was, and not knowing how to identify myself with the accolades that I did before. And that's going to be challenging in and of itself. So what are those beliefs in that set of thought patterns? So once we get to a place where we understand it and we become aware of what that challenge is, now we want to start to then look at what are the old beliefs that are anchoring us in the suffering. And in that, we go through a set of steps. I go through 6 little steps pretty much, but they're a little bit more elaborate, that kind of help people start to pull apart those old beliefs. Because if we can dismantle those old beliefs, we are now dismantling the suffering, at least a part of the suffering that we're experiencing today. So we want to definitely make sure that we start to dismantle those old beliefs. In a different set of beliefs, we find ourselves operating in something much more present to who we are today, something that a belief system that really is ours and not one we learned from society, family, and others. And we start to redevelop our definition of self through those new beginnings. So it's really a healing process that is offered to you when you go through a time that's challenging in your life. It offers you the opportunity to either stick with it and keep going, or not. Each one of us has free will. That free will is ours. That's not going to be taken away. Well, I guess some people would like to, but that's yours. Free will is yours. So what are you going to do with this challenge? And sometimes you think it's a cognitive decision. Okay, I'm just not going to let it bother me. I'm just not going to let it bother me. Well, then we're just pocketing it. And the more we pocket it, the more it can creep up at a time it wants to. So sit back and ask yourself, which part of it you're willing to live with and what you're not willing to live with. And then take that step forward to heal whatever you're ready to heal. A question with anxiety and depression that I offer to all of you. If it's something that's been in your life a lot, where did you catch anxiety or depression? Our country likes to talk a lot about genetics, but these two experiences are very contagious. If you sit with somebody who's anxious, you can feel yourself stop breathing and you get kind of tight because you can kind of feel their anxiety. If you're with somebody depressed, you get very heavy and exhausted and you're like, oh my God, all the energy is zapped out of me, right? And that other person doesn't want to do this to you, but the energy of the anxiety or the depression is very contagious. And if you're spending a lot of time with somebody suffering with anxiety or depression, you can start to feel some of the symptoms just because you've been around it for a long time. So I did want to put that out there. So, I keep saying healing. It's a process. As you can see, it's a process. You didn't just get anxiety, because somebody tripped a switch, even though I keep using that phrase. That's not how we get it, right? Yours wasn't just a trip switch. That was quite the experience, wasn't it? And you went through quite an experience during and after. And so now you have the anxiety at some level. So here we are. If that was a process, why do Americans think that just a pill is going to make that end, right? So healing, to live free of it, is also a process. It doesn't have to be a scary process. We certainly don't make it scary in my world, because I don't believe in that nonsense. I believe that we can actually heal everything from a place of positivity and movement forward. Are we going to feel? You better damn well believe you are, because you're feeling already. That's why you're suffering, right? You've got these fear-based emotions happening inside you, and that's what we call suffering. Whether it's little or a lot, it's still thrown into that simple category. So we want to move out of the suffering and into the freedom of life. And that's how, with me, as we start to look at the depression, and I'm sure there are other therapists out there, I'm just telling you how I work in here. When I look at each challenge that is presented in a person's life, I want to look at how we're going to master it, not how we're going to live with it, not how we're going to manage it. I don't even manage stress. I work to move beyond it. I want to be free of anything that's on that uncomfortable column, so I can be particularly free and joyous, as close to 24/7 as I can possibly be in this life. And when another challenge presents, I want to be able to embrace it, move through it, and come right back to a higher and greater joyous experience. Does that make sense? I think it can be both. I think that sometimes, first of all, when you're anxious, you're tight a lot. and that tightness that you're feeling just from the internal, angst is depleting a lot of the minerals and exhausting the body. So that then leads to the muscle fatigue and the possible cramping. So that can be a literal experience that comes out of the emotional. Now, we talk about it being psychosomatic, but the indigenous people of the land, and I do believe, always said every illness and injury comes from an imbalance inside. So if in fact that's true, then we can honestly say that there is a psychosomatic component in absolutely every injury and illness that we experience, because our emotions cannot be separated out. And you're hearing it now in Western medicine. They're finally starting to say, stress can cause this and stress can cause that. So what are they saying? Those are your fear-based emotions. They just don't say emotions in this country. They say stress to cover the whole category of fear-based emotions. So, it's, yes, it can be psychosomatic. And then to be more literal in an answer to you, yes, there are some people who just in their fatigue, they start to identify with the anxiety and the muscle cramping and some of the other side effects can be much more psychosomatic. In the anxiety category, you have the OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder, and you also have the hoarding. And those are behaviors, right, that we see. The OCD is the behavior coupled with a thought, right? I count and I do. I count and I do it. It's the thought and the behavior that goes together, and that comes out of anxiety. In the hoarding, it's a behavior of collecting out of fear of letting go of. And everybody's fear of letting go is completely different from hoarding. It has a very personal nature to it. But again, which of that, if they start to feel some of these other symptoms, what's going on there? In the OCD, you can have people take on complete symptoms of, I've got a client who takes on full symptoms of head injury because he's so terrified of having a head injury. A lot of the symptoms with anxiety are cardiac arrest and lung. I have COPD. It's hard to breathe anyway, but then if they can't breathe, they can't tell if it's a COPD or the anxiety. So again, you can throw that psychosomatic component in there, but then that's the exact trip of anxiety. That thought process gets in the way. It trips that serotonin. That trips more thinking, and you're off to the races before you've got a handle on it. So yes and no in many ways to that question. It's a good question right now. I think I'm doing good. Okay. So let's look a little bit at, I just want to take a few minutes, and I just want to kind of look at, and I think this list is going to be self-explanatory. What are some of the things that you can do to manage anxiety or depression in the course of the day? And literally, the very first thing that I put on here is breathe. So I'm going to ask everybody in this room right now not to change your breathing, but to consciously follow your breath in and out. Just follow your breath in and out. Okay. Following it? Follow it in and out. Now on your next in-breath, I want you to slow it down just a wee bit. And follow it in and follow it out. And now on your next in-breath, I want you to deepen it just a little bit. You can remember that little trick, and there's more I can do with just the breath alone, but if you can remember that little trick, if you start to feel some jittering anxiety inside and you go back to being conscious of your breath, you will feel, I don't know if anybody felt it, you feel your body start to calm. Mm-hmm. So anxiety, one of the physiological effects of anxiety, and it can also happen with depression, but it's different. With anxiety, you go into that fear, that fight or flight mode. From a neurological perspective. And so that robs the blood system of oxygen. The blood then becomes concentrated with carbon dioxide. That's what causes a shortness of breath. We tighten up muscularly. We aren't taking deep breaths any longer. We are no longer oxygenating our blood. Just by breathing alone, we start to bring oxygen back into the blood, which knocks out the CO2, which brings a physiological change to the anxiety. Okay, so just breathing is important. But now we've also added the focus of following a conscious breath in and out. And as we bring that conscious component into our breathing, we bring a focus in. And of course, one of the things you're going to see over and over on this list is anytime we bring a focus up, we can actually narrow down the anxiety. Getting outdoors for anxiety and depression. There is a book out there. I should have written down the title, doggone it. It's from either Japan, but some Asian country, where they have parks to go. Is all about what happens when you're out in nature. You know, oh, it's the best healing. So you want to get outside, and I tell everybody, walk for 10 minutes at least once a day. If you're struggling with either of those sets of challenges, get out and walk for 10 minutes. And if you're depressed and you can't motivate yourself, then make it a point to yourself to get somebody you know who you can rely on to hold you accountable and go walking with you every day for 10 minutes. But if anybody ever sits with your spine against a tree or wraps your arms around a tree, you will feel a soothing. I remember the first time I did that. I have this ficus that I grew from a sapling in my backyard. And the first time I had to hug at the trunk, you can't hug because it's like big. But there's this one branch that comes out right about here, and it's about this big. And I knew when I was told to go hug a tree in my backyard, I was like, oh, I know exactly which one I'm going to hug. I walked up and I grabbed it. And I felt like a little girl holding on to my dad. And my dad died about 11 years ago, and it was like the coolest feeling. And the branch hits my heart, and I hold it, and I just feel like that little girl when my dad used to just swing me, you know, and it was just that alone made it all worthwhile. So laugh all you want from the jokes that are made, because the jokes are usually pretty good, but the truth of the matter is you're right. Hugging a tree, getting in nature, laying in the grass and feeling the sun, anything like that where you're becoming one with nature is quite healing. Meditating, of course, you know I'm going to have that on the list. You can do walking meditations where you walk and you just do a mantra, which is a positive statement that you say over and over and over again. You can do a sitting meditation as well. You can meditate indoors or outdoors. I recommend both because they're two very, very different experiences. Focusing. Sitting outside, and I used to do this years ago all the time. Sit outside, close your eyes, and listen to as many sounds as you can identify, and then see if you can hear sounds beyond those sounds. And if you really get good, see if you can hear sounds beyond those sounds. And just let yourself pay attention to the sounds. Once you do that, you can also pay attention to how many different colors of green or how many different objects do you see. You can also then start to feel your body. Can I feel my ring finger? Can I feel the palm of my hand? Can I feel my elbow? Can I feel? And you just go through that. All of these focus the mind on a point instead of fighting against the thought processes that are going on during anxiety or depression. So all of those kinds of things can work. Again, sleep hygiene, and I do want to do that. Positive. I'm going to come back to it because I want to spend time with you on that. Gratitude, having a positive thought process. In the morning, wake up with a positive comment and say to yourself in the morning, I'm going to do this one positive thing and be grateful for it today. And just having that for the future in the day, it sets a different kind of stage when you awaken in the morning. So have that one positive thought. Dance like no one is watching. I mean, it just move. Sing like nobody is listening. Whatever your thing is, all by yourself, just do. And let it, if it makes you cry because you're depressed, cry. Like, that's a great thing. Of course we cry when we're sad. That's what we do. Interrupt the thought. With anxiety, I teach everybody, if all of a sudden you start to hear those thoughts going down that rabbit hole, say, stop, that's anxiety, I'm not going there. And switch to a positive thought that you have already written down that you're going to use when you start to have your anxious thoughts. But you want to make a shift. If we had more than an hour, I would have given you a great clip to watch that would make you laugh hysterically about that whole concept, but we didn't have time, unfortunately. Get out of the future and the past. Depression and anxiety work by jumping right over who you are today. It's either in the past or it's in the future, but it's not right now. And right now, each and every one of us is okay. We're sitting in this room. We're safe. We're together. There is no fear. There is no sadness. There is no pain. But as soon as our mind thinks about what has happened or what could happen, we can bring them back. We can bring those feelings back up inside us. But they're still not really happening in this room. So we break that thinking by saying stop. We then come back. We get out of the past. We get out of the future. We come back to the present. Sometimes the present is still offering some challenges, so I try to tell people, don't try to come back and be too literal on this. You may need to have a mantra in place that you can also use some sort of a positive statement that you can use at that time as well, depending upon your situation. Stay connected with others. If you're going through any depression or anxiety, stay connected, because we tend to isolate, especially if we get lonely. The irony is we want to be left alone, and that couldn't be more counter to the healing at those times. That's what allows our mind to get a hold and drag us right down. If you use any recreational drugs, stop, don't, because they really kind of screw with you at those times. It's just not good. Don't go there. And stay away from vagueness. You heard me mention something earlier in the talk today about things being vague. Vagueness brings up fear better than anything. You know this. In your life, when somebody doesn't give you a direct answer, you fill it in. And what do you fill it in with? Whatever your fear is. So get rid of the vagueness. You want to be direct. And if somebody is vague with you and doesn't give you a direct answer, just ask them to please be more direct that that was a vague answer for you, so that you're not walking away with your head spinning, because that'll trip the switch on either depression or anxiety. Do at least one thing a day that's what you wish to do, something that you like to do. Not big. Don't overdo. Just pick one little thing, right? So just one little thing. I love the carrot cake at J. Alexander's. So, go have carrot cake at J. Alexander's. Don't do too much of that when you're depressed, because then you gain a bunch of weight. It's very good. So anyway, watch a comedy. Watch something with humor. To laugh is healing, and it's a very, very, very powerful form of healing. So watch a comedy. Consult with a professional. Honestly, don't hesitate to reach out. You don't have to, you don't have to embark upon anything, but you do need to reach out at these times. Make sure that somebody is helping you understand what you can do for yourself. It does take, medicine is never going to heal you. It takes somebody who really knows how to get down inside, get rid of it, so that you can get rid of the meds and you can have a free life, free of all of that stuff. And this life is about teamwork. Yeah. None of us go at it alone. And so why we think we have to heal all alone is only because this particular culture has deemed it so. There is no reason why we can't lean upon one another. There is no reason at all. That's what we're all here for. Include relaxing activities, and for God's sake, if you are really struggling with anxiety or depression, talk to somebody about an emotional support animal, because I cannot tell you the healing I've seen just by having an emotional support animal that stays with you as much as possible. If you're anxious, know your symbols that trip the switch, same with depression, and please journal, because it gets it out of the inside of you and puts it down on paper where you can then objectively look at it, read it, and tear it apart. Number one, I don't know how many I have here, but the breathing and the journaling are the bookends to the list with great purpose. So I want you really to pay attention to those two. And now, as I promised, let me just quickly go over, and then whoever wants to stay after 7:30 and ask more questions, it's fine. Sleep hygiene. The hour before you go to bed. If you're struggling with either anxiety or depression, you're having any sleep issues whatsoever, pick a time to go to sleep. And an hour before that time, no TV, no computer, no smartphones. I don't care how difficult it is. Just do that. Make a commitment to yourself not to do that, at least initially. I don't have a TV in my bedroom. Don't even want a TV in my bedroom. I don't have a computer in my bedroom. And my phone sits next to it, but it's turned off as soon as I'm in there, because I don't even want to know anything about it. It goes on that sleep time, do not disturb, and that's that. So that's the first thing. Pick your time. Go to an hour before and make a promise to yourself. And just give yourself, do it for 7 straight days. And see how different it is. And then you can make another decision, but definitely get rid of anything that's got that screen thing going. If you're a reader and books, really kind of get you excited, I would not recommend you read a book, because then you're going to stay up, because you're going to get into the book. I can stay up all night long and read a book. That's not good. But a magazine is very different. If you have an interest magazine, you can read their short articles, or you can look at pictures, and that calms the mind, it settles it. With the beautiful advent of YouTube, we have all kinds of soft, sleepy time music. That's wonderful. Lavender scent is very relaxing. You can get natural oils. I recommend Nature Symphony right up here on Palmetto and First. She does a great job, and the oils that she has for sleepy time are excellent. Sandalwood is another one. A lot of men prefer that smell over the lavender, and it calms the mind as well. They're both excellent. You can actually put it on your pillow. You can put it by your bed in a diffuser. But either way, that sets the atmosphere. A warm bath or a shower. It does not have to be a bath, But if you take a shower and you make it warm, and when you stand in that water, you want to feel, if you're in a shower, feel the water flowing over your body and washing away the tension and everything that makes you awake. Close your eyes and feel it pulling anything out of you that is not allowing you to relax, so that you really have that opportunity to kind of calm. There's some other things you can do too. You have 2 apps that I recommend that are out there. I wish I could say I did one, but I did not. One is called Simple Habits, and one is called, what's the other one? Simple Habits and, shoot, I'll think of it in a minute. They're both free. They're on your smartphone. If you go to the, if you go to the App Store, they're both like right up at top. But they're both excellent. They get you started with 5-minute meditations. I also have 5-minute meditations on my website. I have various meditations to get you started on my website, but these apps are absolutely excellent. And they get you trained to do little meditations at night. And if you're meditating at night, you'll fall asleep meditating, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong at all. Let's see. Headspace. Headspace and Simple Habits are the 2 that are getting great reviews from everybody that I'm working with, for sure. So I recommend them. So again, I'm more than happy to answer any questions, but I know it's a little past 7:30 and I don't want to keep you past, too far past the time. So any other questions that you want to throw at me? You know, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I was trained at the University of Florida and the psych program for counseling psych, and a doctoral program. We didn't have a master's back then, and so we actually took a long time ago. So I came down here. I was married at the time, so I was still in the program. And when I started private practice in '95, I was analytically trained, so I was in analysis as well, because that's how you do it. You know, like psychology kind of helps you to this point, but what about life afterwards? And so the answers start to change as well. There's so much more to life than, you know, this mundane existence, right? As you probably experienced. So at that point, I started to really broaden, and I developed at that point a template that I call the SAGES template, and it teaches you how to be on a conscious journey to enlightenment. That's how I put it. And so that template I use to teach people the simplicity of life, and it's from that simplicity that everybody finds an easy way to really start the healing process. So that template I've been using now for, well, ever since, so what does that say, the late 90s, and I have never had a human being not like go, wow, I really get this. Like, I've never had anybody. I had this one attorney who, for years, like, he would come in periodically just to challenge me on fear is always an illusion, and we used to have the greatest mental battles, and he'd walk away going, okay, and then he'd think of another way to challenge me. He'd come back in and challenge me again. I thoroughly enjoyed the challenges. It was really fun, but I've never had anybody not agree with what happens, which is to me just an amazing gift, because I would never have thought that it would be that simple and that easy. So that kind of led to where I am today, and so today my practice is really a lot more of the mastering these challenges, not living with them, moving beyond your suffering, and finding what that path is, what your purpose is, and what the purpose of the challenge is, and helping people find that freedom and that fulfillment in their lives. So no matter how much success they're finding in business or in relationship, there's always that piece inside that wants more happiness and more fulfillment and more, because that's the journey. You know, we're always going to be met with challenges in this life. Otherwise, there's no reason to be here. So how are you going to get through them? It's like going down a rapid river. You can do it with a guide or without a guide. But without a guide, you're going to hit those rough patches, and you're going to struggle and flip the boat and get challenged. But with a good guide, they know the rough spots. You're still going to hit them, but you're going to know how to navigate them. You're going to enjoy the challenge, and you're going to make it into the smooth waters that much faster. So I always say I'm your life guide, not your coach. So I'll take you through those rough waters quickly. Stress is situationally induced. So stress is something that has expectations associated with it. Okay, so it can be, except in Western medicine uses it to be like the catchword for emotions. But stress is like there's a deadline, or you're trying to do just any sort of a job, and you're afraid you're not going to be good enough, and that fear of not being good enough creates a stress because there's an expectation associated with it. And expectations are always coming from an external source. Even if we think we're putting expectations upon ourselves, we've learned to do that. It's coming from an external place. So stress is anchored in those expectations. It doesn't exist without them, pretty much. You can have physical stressors in life from toxic fumes and toxins and things like that. But when we're talking emotion, it's almost always anchored in expectation. Very rare that it isn't. So anxiety is a little bit more consistent. It is still the feeling of, it's the fear of the fear, right? And so it doesn't have a direct situational cause. So there's an underlying cause that's sitting there. Now, we may know what that cause is, like the example I used, but it's still when we feel the anxiety come up in everyday life, it's symbols that are triggering it and not a direct expectation or something like that. Now, stress can then cause the anxiety to come back into experience because the stress can trip that switch. But the anxiety is really something that's a little bit more steady state. It's a little bit more future, past oriented. It's got a lot more worry involved in it, and it's not worry for this particular thing. It's more generalized in a lot of ways. I've watched people, get so stressed out that, they're ready to have a stroke or a heart attack because their blood pressure starts to increase from the stress alone. So that can be a pretty deadly experience, right? I've watched people with anxiety. It's very, very mild, but they can feel it and they don't want it. So the anxiety is on a continuum from mild to extreme. The stress can be on a continuum from mild to extreme. So yeah, it really is much more individualized. And then how they combine too is going to also be more individualized. So yeah, next Monday and the following Monday. Next Monday we're doing trauma. So what you could have been traumatic. My guess is it was. Could not have been. But, could have been. But we also just had, the massacre out in Parkland. So I'm imagining that there's a lot of residual effect from that trauma as well. But people have trauma as a warrior. Of course trauma. It can come from, I've got clients who were in the 9/11 disaster, and you have no idea. It just comes up. It can be that kind of dramatic trauma, but it can also be much more simple trauma. Somebody's in a severe car accident and their life is threatened, or maybe they do lose the person next to them in the car accident, and that's a traumatic experience for them. It's any time that you feel the terror of loss. So we're going to be looking at those kinds of things next Monday. The following Monday, which is the final Monday in the month of May, other than Memorial Day, and then we'll be honoring our fallen warriors. That Monday we're going to be looking at abuse. Abuse is abuse, and whether we're looking at domestic violence or whether we're looking at sexual assault, we're looking at abuse patterns, and it is at epidemic levels in this country. It is out of control, so we're going to be looking at all aspects of that abuse spectrum and looking at what we can do to make some changes there and how we can help identify it in people around us and help them get out of any abusive patterns that they are in. And while I'm speaking of that, please, I ask all of you, if you enjoyed what you saw, to know that I do Facebook Live every Monday and Thursday at 1:30. It can also be seen on my Facebook page. My website is KristenBomas.com, and if you just click on the icons up at the top for YouTube or Facebook, it'll take you right to those two platforms and what I'm doing on those platforms. And YouTube, of course, I've got various kinds of things going on there. So please stay in touch, and I really thank each of you for coming tonight. I really appreciate your presence, and I love your interaction and your questions. Thank you very much.